Last week we'd gotten through elders. Garrett told me that he was it at West Point when you were down there that you studied through, and it took 3-4 months.
It was the book of James, and it took the entire year.
Oh, okay. But you said going through elders, you spent 3 or 4 months just talking about elders.
Oh, yes, that was in Alabama. We spent a good 3 or 4 weeks on just the qualifications.
Okay, just on the qualifications, not even on.
We didn't even go to deacons.
Wow. Okay. So hey, we're fast here. We're fast. May not seem like it, but I'd ask if there were any questions kind of on elders, but we're going to go through deacons, and there are so many things that kind of overlap that I don't think we'll necessarily do that, because we'll be talking about some of those things again, and some of them are fairly simple, and so we'll just refer to them. But let's read 1 Timothy 3. I got 1 through 7 for deacons. I don't have that slide right, do I? I'll have to go back and change that. Let's start on at verse 8, though, and read down to 13. 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 8 through 13. And is that working? What? Okay, is it working now? Yeah, it's now. I feel like I have an echo in my head. Deacons likewise must be dignified, not double-tongued, not addicted to much wine, not greedy for dishonest gain. They must hold the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience, and let them also be tested first, then let them serve as deacons if they prove themselves blameless. Their wives likewise must be dignified, not slanderers, but sober-minded, faithful in all things. Let deacons each be the husband of one wife, managing their children and their own households well. For those who serve well as deacons gain a good standing for themselves and also great confidence in the faith that is in Christ Jesus. So, deacons, it's an office in the church, just like elder is an office in the church. By using the word office, I mean a formally appointed position of responsibility in the church. And the Greek word for that is diakonos. There's another Greek word out there called doulos. Diakonos is servant. Doulos is usually translated bond servant. So you won't see that here, but you'll see it in some other places in the New Testament where that word bond servant is used. The difference in those two things is that diakonos or diakonos is related. The focus of that word is on the position in regards to the work, okay, that person is doing. When the Bible uses doulos, the focus is on the relationship of the master to the servant instead of the work to the servant. Am I making that clear? Got both of those things. One focuses on work, one focuses on the relationship of the master himself. So that's when they use bond servant. Now in Romans 16:1, let's just go ahead and turn over there. We see the word used. I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a servant of the church at Cenchrea, that you may welcome her. Okay. The point there is that it used the word servant in the ESV. So, the Revised Standard, most of your translations are going to use, what does it use? New King James. Servant, okay. Some of the older ones will use minister. I think the bishops use this minister. The Revised Standard came out and they used the word deaconess there. And that created a lot of controversy, okay, because it's more the idea of a servant with a small s. And can women be servants of the church? Absolutely. I mean, but can they be in that office of deacon? No. Okay. But when the Revised Standard used the word deaconess there, it almost makes it sound that way. And so it kind of a little bit of a misleading translation there probably. Because when Paul tells Timothy these are the requirements, these are the qualifications to be a deacon, one of the requirements is what? Husband of one wife, okay? Can a woman be the husband of one wife? No, she can't, okay? So the mistranslation there in 16:1 of one or two of the other translations out there doesn't give a woman the right to be a deaconess or a deacon. But it clearly recognizes there in Romans 16:1 that Phoebe was a servant of the church, and women in the church do acts of service for the church too. I mean, meals, cleaning, all the things out there that men are also responsible for doing. But it's not that, not the idea of that appointed position. So, another place we kind of see this happening is Acts 6. Acts 6, there's a problem with the distribution of food. This is right after the day of Pentecost. That just seems too loud to me. Is it too loud?
It's loud.
Okay. Somebody turn it down just a little bit. The voices are in my head are bad enough without my own voice in my head. That better? Still works back there? Okay. Thank you. In Jerusalem, after the day of Pentecost, there were a whole lot of people there, and they were just kind of hanging around. And not just hanging around, but there was a lot of interest and everything. Well, there was a need that arose, and so in a lot of the, does it say the Hellenistic widows? Okay. Were being left out of the daily distribution of food, and so they appointed 7 men with a specific task in mind, and men that were full of the Spirit, and there were a number of kind of qualifications. Look for people like this that can do this, so that the work of the apostles could go on to the more important things, the spiritual sorts of things, and they not be waiting on tables, I think is the phrase. The word deacon is not ever used in that passage back there, okay? But we understand by virtue of the fact of what was being done and how these men were appointed and everything else, we kind of, sometimes we talk about the appointing of the 7 deacons back in that place. We kind of use it by inference. So, okay. The qualifications. And again, some of these are overlap quite a bit with those of elders. Dignified is the first one. Honorable, grave, honest. Okay, the court jester doesn't need to apply right here. Okay, it's not a stand-up comedian sort of job. Not double-tongued. The Greek word there is dilogos. Di meaning two. Logos, word, two-worded. Okay, so not somebody who's two-worded. Telling different stories is the idea. What do we say when we talk about today? Speaking with a forked tongue. Okay, it's kind of the way our colloquialism or whatever for that. I don't know where that comes from. Is that kind of a Native American expression?
Forked tongue.
He speaks with a forked tongue?
Like a snake, maybe?
Yeah, I suppose. A deceiver. Okay, because a snake has a forked tongue. Probably the most obvious thing. Not addicted to much wine. The New King James says not given, I think, to much wine. Okay. For the elder, it just says not addicted to wine. For the deacon, not addicted to much wine. So it's okay to be addicted to a little wine.
I was going to say that was going to be my question.
No, that's not the point of what he's trying to make there. Okay. Should anyone come into God's service under the influence of alcohol? Never. Never, ever. I think you can go back. Well, I know you can go back to Leviticus 10:9. Let's just do it. And this is a principle that is being set forth. Leviticus 10, verse 9. Drink no wine or strong drink, you or your sons with you, when you go into the tent of meeting, lest you die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations. Okay? It was certainly a statute, a law, part of the Mosaic law for the Jews. Do we live under the Mosaic law? No. But is there a principle there that continues to apply? Yes, I would argue yes, there's a principle there, because if you come before God intoxicated, your mind is not where it ought to be. Okay, it's all over the place. Now, it just so happens this comes right after the death of Nadab and Abihu, who offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, and they were killed because of it. Okay. The implication there may be that they were intoxicated in doing this. Okay, is it a necessary implication? It may not be quite that far. It may not. But it sure is in close proximity, and it comes right after it. And to me, it's a pretty strong inference. So, Nobody should ever come before God intoxicated with anything, not just alcohol, but in any sort of a way. And Lee's brought a number of lessons about that topic. Not greedy for dishonest gain. It's pretty parallel to the elder thing. Not a lover of money. Okay. The New American Standard says fond of sordid gain. King James, greedy of filthy lucre. We mentioned that last time. New King James, greedy for money. And Gary brought out in part of his lesson, last week, the idea of if money's so important. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, the quarter.
Yeah, the idea of a quarter. You get that thing far enough and you can see everything around. But boy, if it's the most important thing and it's right up against your eye, you can't really see anything else other than that thing. Okay, I think that was a great illustration. So. Now, it's mentioned in here, one of the possible things that a deacon may be responsible for is the treasury, right? And so if you've got somebody who's greedy for money who's responsible for the treasury, you've got a real problem developing.
You could be putting a temptation,
Sure.
strong temptation for that person.
Yeah. And can you think of anybody in the scriptures that did not do well with that temptation?
Judas, obviously.
Judas, yeah. John 12, okay. He kept the money box or the money bag, yeah, and pilfered from it, okay, and other things as well. So that may be one of the things. Now, again, the parallel is there for the elder as well. Okay, you wouldn't want a person in that position either, but it's certainly here for the deacon. Must hold the mystery of faith with a clear conscience. My take on this is that to have no mental reservation about the doctrines of God, the doctrines of the church, okay, holding something back, holding a personal opinion that nobody else would agree to, maybe. And I think a person who's holding the office of a deacon, they're in a position of responsibility, the community, before the community and everything, and if they privately hold some sort of a materially different doctrine than what the church teaches, what the Bible teaches, then they're pretty susceptible to undermining what it is that the Bible teaches. Okay, and that would be a problem, right? I'd like to get more input from anybody else on what they think. Anybody have a private opinion on what that means?
I mean, it doesn't kind of run along with James says not one that's double-minded.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same idea,
Yeah.
Yeah, you believe this, but maybe you think this might have some credence too, which is not taught in the scriptures.
Yeah. Yeah. Garrett?
Let's say, going back to Acts 6, pick out among you 7 good men for good repute, full of spirit and of wisdom, perform this duty afterward, but we will devote ourselves to prayer and the ministry of the word. Implication being these men already more or less have a firm grasp.
Yeah.
And therefore can't take on this additional responsibility.
Okay. Okay. Tested first. Okay. Several of the translations says must first be proved and found blameless. So given the opportunity, Jonathan?
This is in 9, holding the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience. With the exception of God or the apostles, nobody can tell what anybody else's conscience is. So
Right.
reading 9, if he stops at 9, then it's basically anybody can sign up and say, with the exception of the other ones we've already gone through, I don't steal from people, so and I have a clear conscience, so sign me up.
Yeah.
And it would just sort of stop there. But then going on into 10, let it be tested first. We're gonna keep looking now.
Right.
Because 9 isn't something that any of us can really tell. You look at the person, look at their fruit, it all looks good.
Yeah.
Don't just go on that, test it.
Right. And if like Garrett was saying, you look back at Acts 6, there were criteria out there. Hey, choose among yourselves. In other words, they went out to the people who knew these men. From amongst yourselves, choose somebody who's trustworthy. That was the real the gist of the criteria where, hey, let's give this to somebody that's trustworthy. And you people know who these people are. Who do you trust? Make sure that you give it to somebody who can do that. Now, I kind of broke this up just in terms of what does trusted and blameless mean. First of all, they've got to be capable. Okay? Make sure that they are going to be able to do this job, and that's part of what that testing process. Do they have the necessary skills to accomplish what it is? Okay? Are you going to put somebody in charge of the treasury who doesn't know how to add and subtract? Well, no, they wouldn't be capable of doing that. Okay? Even though they might be trustworthy in a general sense, but is that a skill of theirs? What skills might have been very, very useful in Acts 6? What's that? People sorts of skills, okay, but would knowledge of a foreign language be helpful? Might have been, because you had people from Jews, that were from all these other nations that were in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost. Now, chances are most of them also knew Hebrew, but it might have been helpful for these men to perhaps know a foreign language. Okay, I don't know. I'm giving you examples of the type of skills that could have been helpful in that situation. It was the character of the men that was being pointed out in Acts 6. Hey, look, give us somebody who's got a good character. That was the biggest criteria. Does a person, in terms of still being capable, do they have a record of being able to accomplish an assigned task? Okay, have they done this same thing before? Because we're looking for specific tasks that need to be accomplished. If there's not a task out there that needs to be accomplished, I don't think there's any position for a deacon to serve. Now, you might have a different opinion on that. Make the case if you need to, but we don't need somebody in charge of a bus ministry here. Okay, so we shouldn't assign anybody to the task of doing a bus ministry. Okay, conceivably could that be the case? Conceivably. The point is, the example is there for the point, not to argue whether or not we need a bus ministry. Okay, but if somebody's been able to accomplish a task in the past and shown that they can, then they're capable of doing that. Are they reliable is sort of the other part, and that's the whole trustworthy thing. If you look at Matthew 25, Jesus is, there's a parable here, and I think this parable makes the case better than I can. It's a parable of the talents. In fact, I didn't even pull the verses out. But it says, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over little. I will set you over much. Okay? That's the person that you look at for having the qualifications of being a deacon. They've been tested, found worthy, found capable, and found blameless. And so you know that they can serve that. And they don't need to have 10 different people hawking in supervision over them to watch to make sure that this task is done right. They know that it can be done right. And little things are the training ground for the bigger things. Now, have I ever told you about the coffee mugs? Did I? Okay. When I got out to Massachusetts when I was in the Air Force, I was in the AWACS program office, and so what they're responsible for, that airplane with the big dome on the top, it's a radome that flies around and controls airplanes and everything else. Well, I got into this office, and every year we would have this big picnic, and so we raised funds for the picnic. And one of my first jobs in the office there, of all things, hey, we got to come up with a fundraiser in the finance office. What do we want to do? And I was like, how about coffee mugs? They're like, yeah, let's do coffee. Oh, you'll be in charge of coffee mugs. I'm like, oh man, what am I doing? I got enough work to do. And I'm brand new here. I don't know anybody. Okay, it was a small thing. Now we ended up ordering like 130 coffee mugs with everybody, and it's. Do you want your coffee? Do you want the handle on the right side of the coffee mug or the left side of the coffee mug? There was a whole catalog of different things you could have on the coffee mugs. It just got kind of wild. Well, in the course of this, it was a small job. And at first I'm kind of thinking, I'm a captain in the Air Force. Why should I go out ordering coffee mugs? A 2-year-old could do this. Pride, no question about it. Just my pride talking. But in the course of ordering those 130 coffee mugs, I met everybody in this organization that I was new to. Okay? Everyone. And so, after that, I knew where to go, because I would end up talking to these people. What do you do here anyway? And find out. And it made the whole rest of my job a lot easier, because of this dumb little thing over here that I thought was dumb. It wasn't dumb at all. Okay? Now, that specific thing, yes, but it made so much more able to happen later on. Okay? And it worked out well. So when you're in the military and you're stuck with some of those additional duties that you hate, those are things that really kind of grease the skids for getting other things accomplished. The same thing is true in the community at large. The same thing is true in the church. Okay? It's getting those little things done and knowing that you're people knowing that you're capable of accomplishing something. You all know Dennis Jalbert. Okay? You go over to Tingsboro, and he's gone now. He moved to Texas. Okay? But the boys would go over there and they'd ask a question kind of in the church or something. I don't know, ask Dennis. And everything was ask Dennis, ask Dennis, ask Dennis, because Dennis got involved in so much stuff. And they knew that he was reliable. And so he was, involved in a whole lot of things in the church over there. Okay? Which is a great training ground for other things that, he will be doing later on in life. So, okay. So that's little things, training ground for bigger things. The wives dignified, and it goes on, not slanderers, sober-minded, faithful in all things. Several of the translations use the word their wives for that. The Bishops of Geneva, King James, New King James, and ESV use that. The ASV, the New American Standard, Young's, and those are the ones that I typically look at when I'm going through lessons, uses the word just women right there, okay, instead of their wives. The Greek word there, gune, G-U-N-E, is translated wife or woman, depending on the context of what is happening in the verse. And if you want to be literal and translate it as woman in verse 11, and use that as the rationale for making women deacons, we're kind of back to that subject, then you've got to deal with verse 12 and be literal, where she's got to be the husband of one wife. And so their wives is a much better translation in there. But they've got to be dignified, same as the person you're being considered, to be a deacon. Their women, their wife, his wife ought to be dignified as well. Not slanderers. The Greek word diabolos, diabolical is where we get the word diabolical, is back this. A false accuser is what the Greek means there. So, sober-minded, the same thing as in elders. Faithful in all things. Okay? So we're talking about a good, solid Christian woman, is what is being talked about here. Now, these particular qualifications are not in the area on elders. Do they apply? I think they apply. Okay? I think it'd be tough to make a case that they don't. It'd be okay for an elder's wife to be a lush. Okay.
Should any Christian woman.
Exactly.
Whether she's married or not.
Yeah. So, but I think the real focus here we need to look at is that if you're going to consider somebody to be a deacon, okay, the quality of his wife, okay, is important. And we've kind of said the same thing in the past when it talks to an evangelist's wife, right?
Well, we were even talking about this last week, that with an elder, some of the stuff there's stuff where it's the elder needs his wife to bounce some things off of, like the same thing. I mean, if the wife is somebody who's unruly and
Right.
and not a Christian, that's a major problem.
Right. Well, because it shows he's incapable of managing his household well.
Right.
Okay, so, which is the next one? Right. Well, there's the husband of one wife in here,
Right.
same issue as the elders, and the same sorts of questions, and it's best to run those things through your mind before the situation arises, and study those things out. And sure enough, the one thing you don't study out will be the one that happens that you've got to deal with maybe at the last minute or whatever. But at least being familiar with the situation is important. And then managing children and households well, same as one of the qualifications of elders. So, okay, in verse 13 of this, back to 1 Timothy chapter 3, 13. Those who serve well as deacons gain a good standing for themselves and also great confidence in the faith that is in Christ Jesus. So, great confidence in the faith. Sometimes some of the translations render that great boldness. Okay. Now, when any Christian exercises their faith, what does it do? Strengthens them. Okay. Makes them more bold in bringing forth God's word. Okay. So I think that's probably the main part of the point that's being brought up there. So now some questions that fall out of verse 13 though, is being a deacon a prerequisite for being an elder? No, it doesn't say that. Okay? There's nothing in the part about elders, there's nothing in the part about deacons that you have to do this job before you can do that job over there. It's something that's not stated. Could it be a good training ground? It could be. Does being a good deacon ensure that you are going to be, that this man is going to be a good elder?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. There are different qualifications. There's overlap, okay, but there are some different qualifications there. There's a different skill set for being an elder and for being a deacon, okay?
Also a big difference in the amount of responsibility they have before God.
Right.
You know, where is this one, is a deacon responsible for, to whatever extent, the souls of the people in the church
Right.
that he's in, and an elder very much is.
Right. And so if you want to separate these roles, the deacon focuses on physical sorts of needs, basically, okay? And the elder, spiritual things, okay? And they will give an answer for how they lead, right? So, okay. So there's different purposes, different roles. Anybody ever hear of the Peter Principle in business? What is that? Anybody remember? Yes. Okay. Colleen says this. Yes. Huh? Well, over your ability, or the idea that the guy that came up with this was his last name was Peter, Dr. Peter or something like that. Okay, and he kind of identified this thing. He says the simple way to understand it is you rise to your level of incompetence. Okay, you do a good job down here, and so what do? Promote you here. Okay, you do a good job here. What do? Hey, they promote you here. You do a terrible job up here. What happens? You don't get promoted. They don't want to embarrass you by demoting you. Okay, so the organization just kind of struggles through this incompetent person at that level, but they have risen to their level of incompetence. I'm not saying it always happens or anything else, that anybody in every position is incompetent because that's where they are and can't get any further, but the idea is out there that just because you did this well or served in this role doesn't mean you're going to serve in that role well. What's that? Oh, it might be a good indication.
Referring to another man.
Okay. If somebody has failed as a deacon, should they be considered for elder?
Well, depending on where they fail.
Yeah,
Where or how.
it is a place to be really careful, Garrett.
I think it depends on the nature of the failure.
Yeah.
If they're a deacon and they're in charge of, let's say, a really specific, technically oriented task, but they're a great people person and they get along with the rest of the congregation and they're really good just being among other folks, they might make a perfect deacon.
Or elder, they might. I mean, it's the nature of the failure is really what needs to be.
Case by case basis.
Yeah. So, I think sometimes there's a mindset that being a deacon is a stepping stone to being an elder, and we sometimes see one happen before the other. Okay, but the cock crows and the sun rises, okay? The Latin, there's a fallacy there called post hoc ergo propter hoc. It happened first, therefore it caused it, okay? And that's, you have to be very, very careful not to be making that kind of a logical error in your thinking when you're going about something as important as appointing deacons and elders. So, okay. Jonathan.
You had mentioned your opinion, at least, that without a specific task, perhaps there's no place for them to be. Do you think that that is, I kind of agree with you, because I don't really see anything else, but so congregation doesn't have elders, specific tasks arises, or a deacon, appoint deacons for that. Once the task is completed, if it is a completable task, are there then no deacons, or is it a governmental program that wants to
It goes on forever. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I do think that if in that appointment process you can see that this is an ongoing task, then that goes on, that's an ongoing sort of thing. If you can see that this is a temporary task, then I think the understanding from the get-go would be that this is a temporary thing, and when it's done, it's done. We don't need that person as a deacon anymore. So,
And even then, if you have one task that arises, it maybe doesn't even seem like it's going to be ongoing, and you don't have deacons, they're supposed to be tested first. So do you end up testing the person for the deacon job, and by the time we realize, yes, they are qualified, they've passed the test, there is no job? Or are we talking a small job like, elders perhaps would just drive down to here and buy some donuts and bring back all the change kind of test?
well, they certainly ought to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Obviously, if there's no task out there, I think the job disappears. Okay. Now, I had a conversation with somebody on Friday, an extended conversation that kind of ended up around the idea of deacons and everything, and because the questions were, what does the Church of Christ teach? And which just the point, the perspective of that question alone has problems with it, okay? Because I can't speak for the Church of Christ, okay? So I try to bring it back to, well, what does the Bible say about something? And that's where we need to go back. What does the Bible say about something? What's the Bible say about something? Does the Bible say you can have deacons without having elders? Explicitly, I don't think it addresses it.
You go back to Acts 6, it implies it did.
Not without elders. They had apostles that made that appointment. Okay, and we have apostles now, but they're not going to walk in the door here,
Right,
except to the extent that we carry them in.
right.
Okay. Now, in just being around over the years, I've not seen a place with people appointed to the office of being a deacon without there already being elders in place. I've not seen it. That doesn't mean I could argue that it's unscriptural. I just haven't seen it. And so I think there's a reluctance in a lot of congregations to appoint somebody to be a deacon without there being elders there filling their role also. But I don't think I could make a case from the Bible that it has to be that way. It's going to be up to the congregation to manage their affairs and decide what that is. There are still, however, tasks that have to be done. Okay? At some point, about 6 years ago, this was a bar, okay, that had been abandoned for a number of years. Okay? And the members of the congregation at the time decided, okay, let's rent that. Let's tear it apart. Let's build it back in something that fits for us. And so that task was assigned to someone to try to bring that together, okay? And that was accomplished, and then that task is no longer necessary, so it's, there's nobody doing that. So, there's kind of, I think it helps in my head anyway to think of deacon with a big D, when we're talking about the person in the office with a responsibility, and maybe deacon with a small d when somebody is given a short-term task, okay? Now, do we have somebody assigned now to look over the treasury? Yes. Happens to be me. Do we have somebody assigned the task of setting up a schedule so that we know who is going to serve, and so it's not pandemonium when we get here about who's going to do what, and two people are going to fight over who gets to be the song leader that day. It's not going to happen here, but okay. So we've got somebody assigned to do that. We have somebody assigned to what else is out there? My mind is kind of blank. Scheduling, treasury, the bulletin. Okay, somebody assigned. Hey, well, yeah, I'll do that. Okay, that's it. But do we call them a deacon with a big D for doing that? Not really. We haven't found it. We've been able to accomplish the task without the necessity of, going through a formal office sort of thing to make that happen. So, do you think if we had elders, we'd be more willing to make deacons formally to do those things? Something for us to think about. I don't know that we're necessarily going to find the specific explicit answer here, but the implication may be there that's necessary. Jonathan, you're smiling like, yeah.
I'm thinking not having kids, this is suddenly seeming like a good way to get out of things like chairing a business meeting.
Oh, no.
That's right, that's another example.
So I was gonna sit here quietly, but I'm not.
You waited 37 minutes.
Yeah,
so.
I did. And here's why. Okay, so we have these, for an elder or for a deacon, we have these qualifications that are not negotiable.
Right.
We don't have deacons, so we chuck them off.
No, we
Qualifications. You're just calling ministry leaders at that point.
We don't have deacons. So a deacon, we could say, the church could say, look, we have a deacon of the treasury. And I would argue that you would fit the bill here. Okay? Do I qualify to be a deacon of the bulletin?
Yes.
Okay, does Jonathan qualify to be the deacon of the schedule? No, he does not. So I'm just pointing out that in the absence of the ideal, we need to be careful to let the pendulum swing as far as what we think of as who would be good for this job. Who would be good for this job? No, we're not trying to make Jonathan a deacon. We're not. So that
Right.
qualification does not apply to him.
Right.
However, he's doing the job that we would give to a deacon.
Right. But can we at least look in here and say, in verse 10, let them also be tested first. So we've given him a small D deacon task as part of that being tested first, so that we can find out whether or not he's reliable and capable.
Okay, yes, but these men are good managers of their children. So the ones that are first being tested, here, this test, these men are first tested.
Right.
These men have children, and then they are tested.
Right.
So I'm not sure that counterpoint was valid. I don't want to argue it.
Yeah.
I just want to say that we should be careful. And when I say we, I actually mean this congregation, because we have a preponderance of young men, and we're all young. Everybody in here is young, actually. Even Barbara's young. We were talking about that earlier. Anyway, so we're all young. But we have to be careful of what we're doing, because we tend to, I like to encourage the older men in this congregation to do more and less delegating. And I know you hate to hear that. Who wants to do more today?
Right.
But it's in our nature to say, man, I'm just full up. I'll give it to. And again, I'm not arguing against. I'm not suggesting that Jonathan, we're trying to put him in that position, or even me in the position of deacon of the bulletin. But to be careful of in the absence of the ideal throwing away all the principles we do.
Yeah, no, I don't think anybody would argue throw all the things away.
Right.
But there are things in the testing first, okay, that need to be accomplished. Now, we're a small congregation, things are pretty simple, okay? There are congregations out there that are, say, 1,000 people or 500 or something, okay? And the facility itself is a bigger problem, a bigger work than what our facility is right now. We've got it pretty easy. Yeah. Raise your hand if you've had to plow snow here. Yeah, okay. So that thing is taken care of by somebody else, and we're very fortunate in that regard. Anybody cut the grass here lately? No, we haven't had to deal with that either. So there's a lot of advantages to being in a strip mall, and those are two of them. Years ago, I set up a schedule for trying to get people to mow at a place that had about 5 acres of grass, and it was, in a sense, it was kind of a big job because nobody wanted to do it.
5 acres, big mowing machine.
We had a big mowing machine, and nobody wanted to do it.
Tractor.
Okay, and it took some work to get 15 people to agree that I can take 1/15 of it, which basically every 4 months I can do it, and we worked it out so that there were 2 every week, so they could split it up and cover for one another, and so it finally stumbled across something that actually worked. But we don't have that problem here, which is a nice sort of thing. So we've got a simpler set of problems to deal with, and so we haven't needed to do that much. So, okay. Anybody else want to talk more about deacons? Ethan?
Just something real quick, you're saying something about throwing them all out. No, I mean, even though you may not be trying to get to be a deacon, or we should be striving to, we should be looking to be all these things anyway. These are good things to strive for, the qualifications.
Well, I think the qualifications are minimums.
Right.
Okay. If somebody wanted to appoint Jonathan as a deacon in charge of the schedule, I think we would all say no, because he does not meet these criteria in a minimum sort of way. Okay? But it's a small task that needs to be done. It's something that is moved around. Now, it isn't moved around very much because he's the one that set up the computer program that, hits go and it does it automatically. So is it a 3-minute task and then 5 minutes of review? Yeah, that's why nobody else wants to take it on, because otherwise it takes a half hour or better.
I have a question. So Acts 6, we know that 7 were appointed. Do we know explicitly or for sure that they were deacons?
The word is not there.
The verb is.
The verb is?
The verb is there. It's not for, I mean, if you didn't know anything else, you'd say it's the exact same word. It is the word, it's the verb. It is not desirable for us to neglect the word of God in order to serve tables. And then,
Okay.
in verse, that was in verse 2, and it is again in verse, maybe 4, I'd have to look, yeah, 4, to the service of the word.
Okay,
We
does-
devote ourselves to the service of the word.
Yeah. The ESV uses ministry the second time,
Yeah.
and before it uses serve. So, okay.
So whether or not, the question is did these people become big D
Right.
servants?
Yes.
I mean, they were at least small d.
Absolutely that. Do I think that they were large D? I do think they were,
Right.
but
But this also goes with your task thing. This was a task that they served for a while, then you see these men in other places.
right,
They've gone other places.
right,
I mean,
Right.
there was a task that they served under at the time. They didn't stay right there and
Right.
stay.
right.
They
And people move. I
Right.
mean, Dennis moved from Tingsboro to Texas.
Right.
Is he a deacon in Texas? No, he wasn't a deacon there,
Right.
but he was involved in a whole lot of things. Mike, you had your hand up a minute ago.
I was just gonna ask, should a deacon be held in esteem with an elder?
Did-
Not necessarily.
Tough to answer, right?
Not in the same sort of way. I mean,
yeah,
the
yeah.
elders is looking out for your spiritual well-being.
Right.
I mean, he is.
Yeah. There's a different task involved, like we said.
Yeah.
I think that if someone who's appointed to that position came and asked for help, you would try to help them, whether they were a deacon or an elder. Okay? In that sense, you are showing esteem to both of them because you are complying with a request that they've made. Okay? I don't know if that helps or not. Wes?
Do you think that a preacher should be held in an elder or deacon position?
I've seen it, but is it necessary? Okay? And if they meet the criteria, then I wouldn't have a problem with it. There is a difficulty that you need to be aware of, and that is that the elders are responsible for everybody's spiritual well-being. That includes, practically, because it's a practical matter, hiring the evangelist.
Right.
Okay? Now what if you've got 3 elders, one of them is the evangelist, and the other 2 elders think that he's preaching something that doesn't belong. Now you've really got yourself, you've boxed yourself in a little bit. Can the 2 elders that think the other elder is off track, who's the evangelist, fire him and him remain an elder in the congregation even though he's been fired as an evangelist? I'm not saying it's not done, and it can be. Would you be better off to have that situation than to not have elders at all? It's up to a congregation to decide that. I mean, there are some gray areas in this. Given that the minimum criteria are met, there's still some gray areas in there for a congregation to think about and work through. And are we going to work? Not we, but is a congregation going to work through them that way, or are they going to work through them with understanding and deferring to one another? Okay, because how we do that might be more important than exactly what it is we decide to do in the end of that. Okay, how we go about that. So long as we've still met and stuck with what the qualifications are. Okay, then at that point, how we go about it is also quite important. Okay. Lee's gears are turning there. No? Okay. The blank face makes it look like gears are turning there. Okay. Any other questions? That was fast.
It was 7 years ago this Sunday that we moved in.
Okay. 7 years.
2000, August 2010. First Sunday in August.
Seems like yesterday, doesn't it? Except for you were much younger. Marcy hasn't aged, but
Well, he took a year off. He went to Europe for a year.
yeah. Well, it's been a good 7 years, I think. So, okay. Next week, we will move on to. No, I won't. So next week, Gary's going to teach Philemon. If 2 weeks are necessary, take 2 weeks, right?
Okay.
And then we will get back to. It'd be better to split up this part of Timothy than it, because we're really moving on to a somewhat different subject here now that we're done with elders and deacons, kind of. So if necessary, he'll take 2 weeks of Philemon. If you need a week and a half, take a week and a half, and then we'll go back into 1 Timothy when I get back. So, okay, thank you, everyone.